Good evening, everyone. I am Kathy Griever, and I welcome you to the first in a series of exciting webinars hosted by Sandbox as part of the Kruger National Park Centenary celebrations. In the next few months, we will be joined via a virtual platform by some of South Africa's most renowned conservation scientists and managers, who I am privileged to work with. As we reflect on all the key conservation drivers in which Kruger National Park has played a shaping role over the decades. As I said, I'm Kathy Griever. Just in a little bit of background, I'm the General Manager of the Savannah Research Unit in Scientific Services, and will be co-hosting tonight's webinar with Mr. Dani Pienaar. I have a 30-year conservation background, with a passion for providing science management interface by facilitating a common understanding and approach to meeting the conservation mandate of sandparks. So this extensive knowledge and experience is really critical to the integration of science and evidence-based learning into management decision-making. This also requires continuous relationship building and integration of different personalities and ways of learning. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Dani Pienaar, who is the Senior General Manager for Conservation and Area Integrity Management, a position which he has held since 2020. Dani was previously the General Manager of the Research Unit here in Kruger National Park, and since 2008, he became the Senior Manager of Scientific Services, basically overseeing the research in all our sandparks. Dani was raised in the Kruger National Park and also started his career in the Kruger National Park. He has experience in managing research across 21 national parks, science management, academic partnerships, protected area conservation, planning and management, rare species research and management. So yeah, he's got quite a vast knowledge which he's gained over the past 38 years. For today's webinar, we will convey the leading role that the Kruger National Park has played in terms of conservation in South Africa and the advantages of having an embedded research unit as a key component. But before we start, just some housekeeping rules. We would like you for tonight to please use the chat box if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, and to also notify the team if you are experiencing any challenges with the sound or visual. So just to lead into Dani's discussion, conservation in Kruger National Park has a rich and dynamic history, which over time has facilitated and contributed to shaping of the conservation mandate in South Africa. The management decisions made in the Kruger National Park over the decades has enabled much learning and opportunities for adaptive management. So I will now hand over to Dani to lead us in a conversation on how conservation management have evolved over time. Over to you, Dani.
Thanks for that generous introduction. Sorry for that. It sounds like we lost the sound there for a second. So, as I said, the Kruger Park is, let me just go back quickly. As I said, the Kruger Park is one of 22 national parks, and it sits in the northeastern part of South Africa in this savanna biome. Because the topic is so big, we're going to cover it in a series of webinars that's going to follow. So I'm just going to show some highlights tonight, and then in the following weeks and months, issues will be touched on in more detail. The Kruger Park is special because it is big. It's 2 million hectares in size, 350 kilometers in length, and about 60 kilometers in width. It borders two other countries. It can maintain large mammal-prey interactions. It's a very heterogeneous landscape, and it's got high biodiversity and cultural diversity. Tourism is our predominant form of land use, and the Kruger is a major economic player in the region, and it's also the main generator of revenue for sandparks. So the reason Kruger is so diverse is because of the interplay of the abiotic factors like the geology, which is orientated from north to south, as you can see on the map on the left. The major rivers that flow from west to east through the Kruger Park, and a very strong rainfall gradient that flows from high in the southwest to much lower in the northeastern parts of the park. Let me just touch on some brief historical events that were important and that sort of shaped the Kruger Park as we see it now. There have been people living here forever, and there was ancient trade routes that connected the Kruger Park with Indian Ocean traders, specifically from the Mapungubwe Kingdom in the north, and people traded gold and ivory. When the first European entered the Lowveld, he came from De La Goa Bay, which is currently Maputo, and he came up to the Komati River and into the Kruger Park across the Crocodile River. His name was Francois de Kuiper. He was a Dutchman. He saw many people and lots of cattle, very few game, and just a couple of elephants. That situation changed over time. And the Kruger Park was eventually established. But before the park was established, we had a severe rinderpest epidemic, actually a pandemic, that swept the African continent. It decimated livestock and game. When the Sabi Game Reserve was established and Stevenson Hamilton became the warden in 1902, there was virtually no game in the park. Things like rhino and elephant were quite extinct. Stevenson Hamilton started rebuilding the park. He made himself very unpopular by moving local people out of the park. And then the park was proclaimed as the first South African national park in 1926. Another important aspect was the foot and mouth disease outbreak in 1938. Maybe a bit similar to what we see today in the country. That gave rise to a decision by the state veterinarians to destroy all livestock inside the Kruger Park, because the rangers at that time kept cattle and goats for milk, and also outside the park. And that's something that was incomprehensible to all the people, and left Stevenson Hamilton with a lasting distrust of scientists. In 1961, the western boundary of the Kruger Park was fenced specifically for disease control purposes, and the eastern boundary was fenced in 1976 for security reasons, because that's when there was a revolution in Mozambique. Importantly, in 2002, we signed the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park Treaty, which started combining neighboring conservation areas into a bigger area. So as you can see on those maps, the Kruger Park boundaries changed over time from 1898 to what you see now on the right-hand side. Since 1926, the boundaries has been more or less the same. The different eras in the history of the Kruger Park can be summarized briefly as follows. First was the Iron Age, which lasted for almost 2,000 years. There were many people in the area until towards the latter part of that era. Local regional warfare called Infakan reduced numbers quite a bit. Then came the colonial period. It was lots of pioneers, European pioneers and hunters moved in. They decimated game populations, and we had the Anglo-Boer War that started at in about 1899 to 1902. The next era was a era of game preservation. That's when the Sabi and the Singwechi game reserves were proclaimed. Stevenson Hamilton was the warden, and he strongly focused on protection and preservation and rebuilding the game populations. Predator control was done actively to increase game numbers and also to protect neighbors. The next era was the era from 1926. That's when the park was proclaimed a national park, the first one in South Africa. That was not an easy process, and Stevenson Hamilton had to do much lobbying with politicians. He had to fight farmers and hunters and land companies who wanted to get the park for their purposes. The first Sandparks board was appointed, and the first tourist was allowed to drive into the park. Infrastructure such as boreholes, roads, and tourist camps were built. Stevenson Hamilton retired in 1946, and then the next era started. The research unit was established in 1950, and the research started guiding management. We started doing inventories of biota, monitoring programs was put in place. Kruger Park was fenced for disease control and security reasons. And there was a strong focus on species management. Elephant, hippo, and buffalo were culled. Disease management, especially foot and mouth and anthrax, was implemented, and fire management and research started in the park. Also, the artificial watering provisioning program started gaining momentum. The next era was actually a transformative era in the South African history. It's the dawn of the new democracy. And since 1990, transformation started in the Kruger Park as well. The first senior black manager was appointed, and the social ecology section was established specifically to deal with neighbors. We had severe droughts in 1992 and massive floods in 2000, and that led to changes in the water management, the elephant, and the fire policies of the Kruger Park. And the era from about 2002 to now is called the expansion and inclusion era. That's when focus changed from species management more to systems management. It was enabled by the Transfrontier Conservation Area that allowed us to drop fences and for the system to function much more naturally than it previously could. Partnerships started, especially with concessions and the outsourcing of non-core activities. And gender and racial inclusion was actively pushed at managerial levels. We also started dealing with land claim negotiations, and those are still ongoing. Global climate change and sustainable development are important aspects and focus of the management and research in the park, and the TFCA concept assists us in dealing with these issues. And unfortunately, as you'll see later, rhino poaching started escalating during this era. Here's just some pictures that covers the different eras. You see the first Sandparks board, and Colonel James Stevenson Hamilton, what the early black rangers look like. And the aerial picture on the left of Skukuza certainly looks a lot different than it looks now. There's a lot fewer trees in 1948 than we've seen now in the park. especially in this part of the park. Field rangers in the olden days pretty much dealt with the same issues they do now, catching poachers, removing snares, pictures of rangers doing predator control. And of course, wildfires was a big problem back then because there was no infrastructure such as roads that one could use to fight fires from. Things started changing, and tourists started moving into the park, the first ones in 1926. And tourism infrastructure started being improved over the years. Eventually, even swimming pools was allowed and built in the park. And the picture on the bottom right shows the first black senior managers in Kruger, Dr. David Mabunda. In the middle, Mr. Mabuso Msimang, who was the Sandpark CEO, and Dr. Bandile Mkhize on the right, who was the second Kruger Park director after Dr. Mabunda. The history of the Kruger Park is covered pretty well in a number of books. It's just some examples that I give here. Some of them were written by managers in the park, like Colonel James Stevenson Hamilton, Dr. Pienaar, Dr. Joubert, and also by historians like Jane Carruthers and historian journalist Jacob Dlamini, who wrote Safari Nation. And this is an important piece of work because this is the first history of the Kruger Park that was written from a black perspective. So the Kruger Park is 100 years old as a national park this year. And to commemorate this, we decided to hold a series of webinars through the year that will touch on important conservation aspects and how this evolved over time. I'm going to cover some of the topics very briefly now that you can expect in the following weeks and months. And there's actually also opportunity to add more topics. So if you want, you can write in. Kathy will give the email later and you can request certain aspects to be covered. With these webinars, we hope to pay tribute to all the people over the decades who really worked very hard, gave their blood, sweat, and tears, and sometimes paid with their lives to make the Kruger Park this magnificent conservation icon that it is today. I can just maybe take a quote from Dr. Pienaar, my father's book called A Cameo from the Past. It says, take from the past all that is good and pure and build upon it the future. I think those words are some that we really should take to heart. So the next webinar is going to talk about historic human existence in the Kruger Park, how things developed, and also how the social ecology system department developed to deal with our neighbors. And humans had lived here for a very long time. They stayed near water, near permanent water, and they created what we call now a landscape of fear for animals. Animals would avoid those areas and only go and drink at night. And after people were moved out, that ecosystem driver disappeared. And that certainly can lead to unnatural high impact by certain animal species in certain areas. And management currently are looking at ways to mimic this missing human driver. And it's a very important missing driver. Another webinar is going to look at natural resources use over time in the Kruger Park. We'll look at archaeological records and what that tells us, resource use from the early days, talk about how the policy changed, and look at game donations, medicinal plant donations, and support to traditional healers. Then we're going to look at abiotic drivers in the Kruger Park, rainfall, water provisioning, and fire. Kruger Park's got a long record of rainfall going back all the way to 1910. And why this is important, it tells us why certain management actions were taken and decisions were made. If you look at this picture from the early parts of the century to about 1970, you can see it looks like a gradual desiccation of the Lowveld and the Kruger Park. And that's why managers started stabilizing water resources, because the environment did not have a right to water back then. However, since then, we saw that and realized that this is a cyclical nature rainfall. There's about 10 years of above and 10 years of below average rainfall, and certain spikes like the 1924 floods and the 2000 floods. The floods from January this year is not on this graph yet, but I expect it also to be very high. As you can see on the series of maps on the top left, the borehole distribution in the Kruger Park escalated until in 1985 there was a lot of boreholes in the park. The Water Act changed in 1998, and the Trans-Frontier Parks was established, and that gave us the opportunity to manage the system more naturally, and we started reducing a number of these artificial water points that was put in naturally dry areas to allow the system to function better. Fire is also always important in savanna systems. It's a natural driver. And in the Kruger Park, we've experimented over the decades with various fire policies that Ms. Navashni Govender will cover in her webinar. Lots of lessons have been learned and lots of research has been done on fire in the Kruger Park. This picture just shows you how dynamic the Kruger Park river systems are. There's the Sabi River and Kruger Gate Bridge in the background. The picture from 1988 to the 2000 floods is vastly different. But what I'm trying to say here is that from the picture on the right that looks quite devastated to the picture on the left, lots of big trees, that's just a natural cycle of a river in the Kruger Park system. After the floods we had in January this year, the Letaba River actually looks very much now like the picture that you see of the Sabi in 2000. And it actually washed the Engelhard Dam away in the Sabi. And currently, we probably will not be rebuilding the Engelhard Dam because the Letaba River will now function much more naturally with that artificial barrier that's gone. Really interesting topic is going to be how veterinary services and game capture evolved over time, disease research in the Kruger Park, everything from dealing with developing new drugs, new methods to deliver the drugs, to managing anthrax, foot and mouth disease, and bovine tuberculosis. And there's many interesting stories about disease management in the Kruger Park. For example, you already heard about how the Kruger Park was fenced for disease control purposes. When bovine tuberculosis was diagnosed in the Kruger Park here in the 1990s, the veterinarians even recommended that we shoot out all the buffalo in the Kruger Park to get rid of the disease. Fortunately, we didn't take that decision because that would have had severe negative impacts, we believe. Elephant and rhino management, something that the Kruger Park is renowned for. Both, if you look at the graph, both species were extinct in the Kruger Park. Rhino were brought back from the KZN, KwaZulu-Natal provincial parks, and elephant moved in from neighboring Mozambique. And the populations increased rapidly until rhino poaching started escalating in 2010, and the population has dropped severely since then. Dr. Sam Ferreira is going to do a webinar on this topic. The next webinar will be about how Kruger is breaking its boundaries and broadening its engagement with neighbors. As I said, it's a huge park, but the development of the Transfrontier Park and the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area is adding vast areas to the 2 million hectares, so much so that it's about 5 million hectares that are now under conservation in this part of Southern Africa. Kruger Park is bordered by a lot of people on the west, about 2.5 million, and we need to deal with them. They our neighbors. They affect the Kruger Park, and Kruger Park has got an effect on them. Issues like damage causing animals affecting poor rural farmers is something that's the daily issue, and paying compensation for livestock loss through predators from the Kruger Park is something that we've put in place in the last 10 years, and that certainly improved relationships with our neighbors. And there will be a whole webinar on this topic. The head ranger, Ms. Kathy Dreyer, is going to talk about the evolution of ranger services in the Kruger Park. A lot of the work of rangers stayed the same, but there's also many issues that changed over time and new challenges that rangers have to deal with. She's going to talk about how things were, the challenges rangers face now, and how the park and management is actually trying to assist rangers to look at integrity, to look at their well-being more, because currently our rangers are really under threat, and they are being infiltrated by criminal networks, and we need to find ways to make them more resilient. So don't miss this webinar if you're interested in this topic. Cultural heritage is a focus area of the Kruger Park that has not really received the attention from visitors as it should. Kruger Park has a rich cultural heritage from the sand era, many sand paintings, through to the Iron Age eras where gold was smelted at Tulamela and Makani, and copper was smelted at Mazurini. And currently there's active actions in place to expose our visitors to the rich cultural heritage in the Kruger Park. There's even a museum that's going to be established at Mupani in the near future. The next webinar is going to, or the next session of this webinar is going to be done by Ms. Kathy Griever. She's going to talk about how science evolved in the Kruger Park over time. It's a topic that's particularly close to my heart because I spent most of my career in research and scientific services, and we really went through great efforts to improve the research function in the Kruger Park and in sandparks. This would not have been possible without the help of many people. And I just want to single out the Mellon Foundation, who really assisted us greatly in terms of infrastructure, in terms of many research programs. Staff assisted us to employ staff, the Research Endowment Fund, and many more that Kathy will touch on. And the person there that made it all happen was Mr. Bill Robertson. And I'm really greatly indebted to the Mellon Foundation and to Bill specifically, who gone through great lengths and bent their organization rules to assist the Kruger Park. We bent the sandparks and rules a little bit as well to accept all their generous donations, and that's a story I think that's also covered in one of the historical books by Jane Carruthers. I'm handing over to Kathy now.
Thank you, Donnie, for setting the scene so beautifully and covering the essence of what conservation management in Kruger, but then obviously also sandparks entails. Apologies, colleagues. I believe that some of you could not hear the beginning of the webinar, but all those gremlins have hopefully been sorted out now. But yeah, I will also provide details at the end of the webinar on any further correspondence. So the evolution of science function, it started in Kruger National Park with the appointment of Dr. T.G. Nell in October 1950. He was tasked to establish the research section back then. So this was followed by the appointment of 2 botanists in 1951 and 1952. But over the years, as science evolved, so too did the faces of the managers who took on the role as head of the Kruger-based research unit. So initial studies in the Kruger consisted of checklists of animals and plants and focused on the use of fire and the provision of water for wildlife. This formed the foundation of a long-term research in Kruger, and which enabled wider research in sandparks in the later years. The main focus of my presentation on the scientific services as the primary department driving research and development in sandparks, but we also recognize that departments such as the Veterinary Wildlife Services, Cultural Heritage, Park Planning, and also tourism departments conduct and make use of science. And as you can see on the slide at the moment, I follow in the footsteps of giants. But yeah, it was through all that historical knowledge that we are where we are today. So within the Scientific Services Department, currently I am one of 3 general managers overseeing the research unit of sandparks and responsible for the research and monitoring programs in these various parks. So firstly, it's Dr. Nkabeng Mzaleni. She leads the Cape and Arid Research Unit, where she guides conservation research and protected area management across the parks, highlighted in brown or maroon, whatever color showing on your screens, where the focal areas are on climate change and adaptation. Dr. Stephanie Freitag-Ronaldson is the General Manager for the Garden Route, Frontier and Marine Unit, overseeing the research and monitoring in parks highlighted in blue. And it includes our marine protected areas where the focus, but in Steph's area, the focus is on terrestrial, but also marine and coastal research monitoring. Last but not least, I oversee the Savannah Research Unit, including the Kruger National Park. And as Dania showed you, it all started here. Within the research unit of the Savannah, the focal area is on Savannah grasslands and large mammal population management and wildlife economy. The 3 research units have a geographical clustering, which facilitates administration and also enables the best use of staff capacity, expertise, interest, and provides opportunities for growth. This includes the biophysical and social science research in our national parks. So Savannah Scientific Services and indeed the wider research function in sandparks is very small. The scale of our science function is less than 2% of the organization. And we heavily leverage external capacity, as Dania has mentioned already, both in terms of funding, manpower, and intellectual inputs. Scientific Services has a strong team of scientists, biotechnicians, and research assistants, and a lot of other support staff working in different fields together with external scientists to conduct research in many fields. So apart from us now looking much like the rainbow nation that we are, we also have strong ideological shifts. And these shifts did not happen by coincidence, but it was planned. It was a planned transformation which needed to happen over the years. It also means we had to diversify our staff, not just in people, but also in disciplines and transdisciplinary. I will now quickly reflect on the evolution of science through our various monitoring initiatives, most of which, like I said, started in Kruger. So from the 1900s, we went through the first phase of what I call the triple Ps. which was all about protecting, preserving, and propagating. The first 50 years primarily focused on establishing and consolidating our national parks, putting up fences and protecting animals. So the parks during this era often had a goal of protecting specific species or populations near extinction. This is depicted in the names of our parks proclaimed during this era. For example, Addo Elephant National Park, which was proclaimed in 1931, Kalahari Gemsbok National Park also in 1931, and Mountain Zebra National Park in 1937. In Kruger, the focus was mainly on checklists and animals and plants and the provision of water for wildlife. But during the 1950s, major programs was launched to grade the network of fire break roads to gain more effective control on veld fires. The long-term fire and herbivory experiment was initiated in 1954, aimed at investigating and influencing of our fire frequencies and on season on 4 of the major vegetation types in Kruger across the rainfall and geological gradient. This 72-year fire experiment has played a significant role in how we adapted our fire policy in the park over the time. But more on this in our upcoming webinars. So the long-term monitoring programs like rainfall and animal population monitoring programs were also initiated during this time. Then came the triple M's. So from the 1960s to the 1990s, management in science had a strong species and ecological focus. Sandbox science flourished during this era, becoming more coordinated and systematic with explicit goal of informing management actions. This period marked a shift from merely protecting game or specific species to conserving entire ecosystems, with the goal of maintaining ecological processes for biodiversity. So whilst we continued building on Kruger's long-term burn plot experiments, many other long-term experiments and monitoring data sets were initiated during this era, which Sandparks continues to maintain today. And this includes obviously our aerial surveys. But the long-term fixed point photography series also facilitated the illustration of the dramatic change in our woody vegetation structure on certain of our soil types in the park. Then the third era, coinciding with South Africa's transition to democracy, research shifted to focus on systems like the Savannah Rivers Program, disease monitoring, long-term bio-monitoring of rivers, using tools like the South African scoring system to assess water quality and habitat health, revealing rapid recovery from pollution impacts. Research in Kruger played a seminal role in developing understanding and also influencing some of the key conservation matters. Yeah, I would like to highlight the Kruger Rivers program, which was instrumental in developing the term ecological reserve, which relates to the water required to protect the aquatic ecosystems of the water resource. The reserve refers to both the quantity and the quality of water in the resource. This meant that the environment now also had right to water together with people. We were one of the first countries to embrace the concept of the environment having a right to water. But other long-term monitoring initiatives included the River Savannah Boundaries Program in the Northern Kruger, including support staff and some laboratory facilities at Chingwedzi. There was also the Skukuza-based post-flood and tree grass dynamics programs and the plant ecology fellowship programs. Another one of our long-term monitoring programs in Kruger that added value to long-term data sets is obviously our aerial surveys, which we've conducted basically from the yesteryears. And most of the recent aerial survey data has been put on our blog, and the link will be posted in the chat box for people that's interested to actually go and read up on this, where we basically detail all the different aerial survey techniques that we do, and also the latest animal population numbers. As mentioned earlier, having an institutionally embedded research capacity in sandparks was recognized back in 1950 already, with the appointment of Dr. Nell. It's in spearheading the research section, Dr. Nell already listed 4 issues that were regarded as research priorities, and it's all listed there. And then 70 years later, our research strategy was approved in 2020 with a 5-year revision cycle. We are currently in the final stages of the latest revision cycle, but the aim of the research strategy is basically to enable research and monitoring in sandparks, and it articulates broad research direction to focus attention rather than define specific shorter-term research needs and questions. Sandpark Scientific Services also has key values. We strive for policy-engaged science. Importantly, development of the research strategy also enabled how we express the 7 key values underpinning the science function in sandparks. So yeah, I mean, we can just mention a few where we strive for fairness, integrity, and high science ethics in all we do. But we also promote the culture of collaboration and knowledge sharing. So these are basically all the values that we strive to. Within the research strategy, 10 key research themes emerged, which cover in a cross-cutting manner the various organizational strategic focus areas. These research themes are pertinent to the next 5 to 10 years. We use these research themes during our rigorous research project registration process by allowing people to register their research projects on shorter terms of either 1 to 3 years. We ensure that our co-learning happens, and that whatever recommendations come from the research is usually incorporated in our park management. Findings of this research is also usually published in reports and reviewed articles. I am proud to highlight the huge contribution of research in Kruger to the knowledge base of savanna science in the world. These include a number of theses and publications over the years. The graph shows the journal outputs from 1927 until 2024, but it also excludes some dissertations. It shows a good upward trend over time, and in total there are 2,037 scientific articles included. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier on, from 1995 onwards, we basically really started spearheading this process. So our model, as to why there's such good science happening within Kruger National Park, it's because we have sufficient internal capacity and expertise. There's long-term data sets, data archives, people who can translate this to external scientists. There's a dedicated research infrastructure and support. As you can see, there's our different research camps that I'm portraying in the photos. But this was all done through a system from the Mellon Foundation grants, which have been instrumental in initiating and assisting the diverse and significant science and research initiatives in Kruger initially, and then later into sandparks. So just quickly in the middle of the slide, by the mid-2000s, science support for visiting scientists to Kruger was consolidated through the employment of a science liaison officer, and additional science support also increased. So this also increased the capacity to facilitate outside the research by purchasing required field equipment, computers, etc. But the expanding and improvement of our 3 research camps enabled the expansion of that capacity and doubled the accommodation to more than 50 visiting scientists at a time, basically. The grants further expanded and cemented the critical research support elements within Kruger initially, and as I mentioned later, and broadly across sandparks. This included several support structures like our research camps and facilities, the hard and software, basically strengthening our data science capacity. With this came the start of filling critical positions, for example, our GIS analysts. There were also 3 regional ecologist positions, a laboratory technician, logistics coordinator for the Northern Kruger Park. All of these posts were was enabled during this period. And this was basically to enable science facilitation and expanding the ecosystem monitoring and effective interfacing with park management. So in April 2013, as I mentioned, all this was made possible through the Mellon funds. As agreed to in the original grant proposal, Sandparks successfully mainstreamed the last of the Mellon-funded positions into the permanent establishment table and thus expanded the staff complement in number, also in diversity of functions, and it contributed towards the improved demographic representation. These functions are still critical components of the science function in Sandparks today. Another component at the bottom left of the screen is the establishment of the Ntsasani Trust and the Skukuza Science Leadership Initiative, which arose from the productive first decade-long relationship between Sandparks and the Organization for Tropical Studies. This was also ignited by the diverse early Mellon funding streams. During this period, with the active collaboration of Sandparks, OTS has delivered numerous university-level field-based programs. In the process, students from the USA and South Africa have benefited from this program. So the shorter-term research projects also plays a role, and the longer-term monitoring programs within scientific services. And it's key to making the research so effective, not only in Kruger, but in all our parks. Initially, the research section was stationed in Pretoria Skop, where the reference library and the herbarium were also started. However, in 1955, the board recommended that the research unit and herbarium be transferred to Skukuza. The move to Skukuza took place in May 1957, where the research staff first occupied some of the tourism offices until the new complex was completed in 1959. This building would become the Skukuza Biological Reference Collection, which has become an invaluable asset for Sandparks. Since 1951, the herbarium collection houses more than 4,000 plant specimens. There's also amphibian, reptile, bird, small mammal, insect, and other invertebrate specimens housed here. We now have reference collections also in our Kimberley unit. So with all the data that we collect, a supporting development which started during the earlier 1950s was the establishment of the National Parks Board's own scientific journal named Kudu. This happened in 1958. Kudu publishes research that promotes conservation science and protected area management in Africa. The journal has run uninterrupted since its inception in 1958 and has become an Access internationally accredited journal in the past 2 decades. In the past 11 years, it's roughly 11 years, the journal has published close to 200 papers with an average of around 7 citations per paper, reflecting the relevance of these papers to the wider audience. The journal also produces special issues, like the Sandparks Adaptive Management Special Issue in 2011. and the 2014 special issue on tourism and protected areas, which was launched at the Sydney World Parks Congress. Noteworthy also is a special collection 2 years ago, I think it was in 2024, celebrating the cultural heritage within our national parks. Two major changes have modernized and increased the Kudu Journal's accessibility and credibility. First, Kudu moved to an online publishing platform in 2008, and the entire Kudu collection from 1958 to 2024 has been made available online. This has significantly raised the journal's profile and accessibility, as it reflected, so this is also basically reflected by the 3 million downloads of Kudu articles that have been recorded by the publisher since 2018. Kudu was also listed, so another highlight was the successful application in 2014 to be listed as the Web of Science accredited journal. That year and every year since then, the journal received an impact factor rating, solidifying its scientific recognition and stature as a credible journal indexed in the international recognized scientific database. 10 years later, it had an impact factor of 1.1 in 2024. So that's a really remarkable achievement. So while SANParks had mastered the art of dedicated data collection historically, the post-1994 era saw a marked shift in focus to also synthesize and integrate an understanding from long-term ecological monitoring initiative. So publications of the two academic books, the Kruger Experience in 2003 and the National Park Science book in 2017, represented synthesis at the wider scale. The peer-reviewed Kruger Experience provided an opportunity to catapult SANParks science, basically out of the ordinary and into the international recognition. Examples of broad synthesis include what became known as the 2016 Kruger Benefits Report by Louise Swemmer and Helen Metty. This provides a consolidated reflection of the diversity of cost and benefit impacts at the local scale for a range of stakeholders around Kruger National Park. Similarly, Smith and Bond prepared a 2020 Kruger Drought Report to collect and collate the diversity of observations and reflections on the 2015-16 drought experienced in Kruger National Park. This report intended to complement the formal monitoring and diversity of peer-reviewed research approaches by collating all the various personal observations made by staff during and living and working in the Kruger National Park, mainly to deepen and inform learning from this extreme natural drought. So the first SANParks research report was published in 2012, partly in recognition of the need to reflect on achievements of the function in its diversity and to better share and publicize SANParks' science. The research report provides a bibliography, basically, of all publications conducted within SANParks for that year by both internal and external researchers. And since 2012, it has been building on strengthening science, communication efforts, and training. The research report is all produced in-house, including the design and layout. We have a core team basically focusing on getting all this done, and the report showcases science in an engaging and accessible style for various audiences. All right, our most recent research report has just been published. Hot off press. So SANParks is proud to have initiated and to host 2 annual symposium-style meetings, which has become well-established platforms for sharing scientific knowledge and practical experience. SANParks has also become a convener of global conservation research and practice communities. The Savannah Science Network meeting is hosted annually in the Kruger National Park since 2003. And draws many researchers from more than 19 countries. Yeah, it has come a long way since the early 2000s, where a small group of scientists met in Shingwedzi Research Camp. in the north of Kruger National Park to discuss Savannah River-related issues. This was following the Kruger 2000 flood event, and the initial meeting basically led to the conceptualization of the International Savannah Science Network meeting. But this network meeting would also not be possible if it wasn't for the vision and insight from our founding members, those three dudes at the bottom of the page. And through the enormous support, basically, of Mr. William Robertson, the meeting aimed to bring together local and international scientists to discuss the latest research relating to biodiversity, conservation, and management of protected areas. This was initially within the context and focus of research conducted in Kruger, but later expanded to include research on savanna systems from around the world. The savanna ecology from all continents often represented at the meeting. So the meeting was supported by Mellon Foundation grant until 2013, and I think it has been self-funded from 2015 onwards. In the early 2000s, the Savannah Science Network meeting was held in the Goldfields Auditorium, and yeah, you can see some young faces still sitting in the audience there. That's Mr. Donnie Pina. But yeah, the meeting has highly diverse and dynamic delegate attendance, which has grown both in numbers and origin over the years. Sorry, I'm still here. Over the years, sorry, there was just a glitch here. So it later expanded to include research in savanna systems around the world. And then the delegate information from 2008 shows that representatives from more than 340 unique institutions have participated since then. All right, the meeting is also intended to encourage researchers to share their research findings and provide a platform for dialogue between scientists. It provides an opportunity for scientists to gauge how effective our research programs are. So the photo on the right-hand side basically represents the delegate representation over time, and we thought this year is quite significant because of the Kruger Centenary. We also provided the caps in the different colors of the South African flag. But as you can see, the core group with the blue caps in the middle are the ones that started attending the meeting from the beginning, and obviously that's how the meeting delegation had changed over time. All right, so recognizing the importance and growth of social ecological system perspectives in conservation, Sandbox then also established the Garden Route Interface and Networking Meeting in 2017. So it's known as the GRIN. Much like the Savannah Science Network meeting in Kruger, GRIN arose from a local, smaller socioeconomic systems lab, which had met during 2015-16 in Wilderness in South Africa as a space to begin to address sustainability challenges, which span social values, management practices, scientific disciplines, and governance arrangements. Since 2017, the Garden Route Interface and Networking Meeting connects social ecological researchers with practitioners tackling complex sustainability challenges. And it is held annually over 3 days in October in the Garden Route. All right, I'm coming towards the end of the presentation, but just want to give you some highlights. In 2018, a horizon scanning exercise was conducted with scientists, park managers, and senior managers across all functions and scales in sandparks to provide context for developing key research themes for sandparks. This identified key factors influencing sandparks and the delivery of its mandate at both the organizational and park level scales, especially in the fast-changing context of sandparks. Basically conservation in general, and South Africa and globally. The scientists and non-scientists all agreed that the top 5 influences facing sandparks in the future were basically climate change, human population growth, and national social, political and economic processes, but also illegal activities and changing societal expectations. Over the years, science has matured into a key sandbox asset where scientists are bridging agents between science policy, people, and nature, transforming how the country's national parks are studied, managed, and contribute to global conservation. We play a diverse role, and we are a relatively unique and small house agency-based science function, as I mentioned earlier, but we're servicing a large conservation agency like Sandparks with very diverse functions and deliverables, many of which are science-based, but not necessarily science-like. So these include our development of our park management plans, co-learning with parks and stakeholders, informing and assisting management decisions, providing thought, leadership, and helping responses to crisis, for instance. It's also introduction of new approaches to share what we have learned through media interviews and blog sites. Yeah, we use our blog space on the Sandbox website on a regular basis. Please visit that. Commenting on or influencing policy at various internal, national, and even international scales. We connect with society through public lectures or presentations to learners, and we also engage with our neighbors through various platforms, including our park forums. So as Sandbox looks forward through the lens of Vision 2040, its science function, I believe, is strong and more diverse and more collaborative and more inclusive than ever. Building on our past, it contributes significantly to the 4 primary spheres, which is highlighted on the slide on the left. Basically, knowledge production, knowledge translation, synthesis, and sharing it. Then capacity building and knowledge sharing through networking, collaboration, and service to science. So these domains are wide-ranging and build on initiatives which were established and nurtured over the past 76 years and contribute critically to the dual work of conservation agency and global science. So yeah, the model of research leveraging can only be effective if you have adequately skilled internal science capacity to maintain the internal research function in Sandbox. And that's sort of, I'm just trying to highlight it a little bit with all the pictures that I've got on the side of the slideshow there. But obviously, with looking forward, we do know that in artificial intelligence is a powerful evolving tool, but there are obviously risks associated with that. But we will work towards this as well as we work towards the future. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is the last slide. I just want to conclude tonight and ask that you please join us for the upcoming conservation webinars series, which is scheduled for the next few months. I'm not sure what has been mentioned in the chat box, but we will have a look and see how we can integrate those into our schedule. Yeah, the webinar, as we mentioned, has been recorded and will be posted on our social media platforms. But if you have any specific topics, if you haven't listed it in the chat box already, please share your ideas using the email address that I've posted on the left of the slide, and also include the subject line. Dani, do you maybe want to add something that I might have missed?
No,
or do you want to include anything?
Kathy, just to highlight a couple of issues that was mentioned in the chat box.
Okay.
So there was a request for a webinar on commercialization and tourism in Sandbox. And I think those 2 topics go nicely together. And we've actually identified that as one that we want to do in any case. So that one will definitely happen. And then the next one was wildlife trends. Now, that's also a very interesting story in Kruger through the various eras of management. And what clearly shows is the impact of fences, the water provisioning program, how that had an impact on game populations, and when the fences were dropped and the water holes was actually reduced, how the game populations and game biomass in Kruger responded positively. So that after the water closure, game biomass actually increased in the Kruger Park. And that's a really nice story that I think we will definitely cover in a future webinar as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Donnie. So yeah, Donnie, thank you for sharing your expertise with all of us. And I want to thank our audience for setting time aside to listen to all the amazing work that we do and what we've learned, not only in Kruger, but in all our national parks. And I do hope that you will join us for the rest of these webinars, and we'll most probably adjust our program, but please look out for any invites that come through on our social media pages. And yeah, I wish you guys all the best. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.